if you can find even more joy exploring the things that you do by optimizing, by using these technologies, then these things go hand in hand.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to the Framework Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Engel, president of Southeastern University. And of course, joining me is our co-host, Michael Steiner, SCU Senior Vice President for Advancement and Innovation. And we're excited today to introduce our guest for today's show, Juliette Powell, a leading expert on responsible artificial intelligence and technology. As founder of Kleiner Powell International, she advises global business and governments on navigating AI innovation and ethical data practices. Juliette is the co-author of The AI Dilemma, 7 Principles for Responsible Technology, a faculty member at New York University where she teaches graduate students about technology and leadership. Juliette is a sought-after voice on the future of AI, innovation, and collaboration, and we are absolutely excited to have you join us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. What a joy. I haven't even been to your campus, and I feel like I'm being embraced as part of the family. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a privilege. As we open up our conversation, I'd love to talk about your passion for ethical artificial intelligence and responsible technology. Why do you think so many companies today see AI as more optional instead of really foundational, especially in the workforce?
Well, we've seen this little thing called lawsuits pop up all over the place. And I think that the first movers are the ones who, ultimately get to, yes, innovate first, but also kind of suffer the consequences. There's a reason why Google didn't launch their own language models, that they waited for a competitor. In fact, a competitor that nobody knew of, OpenAI, to do the first launch in November of 2020. And of course, Google's been trying to play catch up since then. But their take was that their risk is much higher than an unknown entity, right? When billions and billions of people in the world use Google Alphabet products, and we're talking about deploying Gen AI to billions of users as opposed to hundreds of millions of users, it's a very, very different calculation.
Massive calculation. And, in today's, I think that trust and kind of accountability, transparency is one of the things that leaders are it's this risk analysis that leaders are going through. So walk us through a little bit about how can leaders be thinking about that risk in their own organizations? What do we need to be thinking about as we're approaching this technology?
Well, there are many different things to think about. Obviously, you want to think about AI governance, right? Ultimately, who is responsible within the organization for coming up with a strategy, for coming up with guidelines, for enlisting a cross-section of different types of employees and thinkers within the organization to help you create that strategy and governance structure. And then how do you start calculating risk? So what I've seen many, many times is organizations are calculating risk from the IT perspective. So really drilling down on the technology, what it costs, what are some of the known risks, but not necessarily putting a dollar value to those known risks so that when the larger organization is calculating its strategy, it's not necessarily taking into account these drivers with unknown numbers. It's just, it's kind of a free-for-all. And I think that's part of the issue is that, ultimately who is responsible within the organization is something that depends from group to group, right? Depending on the way that they've structured it. Is this, something where the CEO is involved in everything? Do they have a board? Do they have a responsible board? Do they have AI governance that's at a different level that can inform the board to be able to ask better questions? So I feel like I'm leading you down a deeper and deeper rabbit hole. And that's one of the reasons why I'm currently working on creating a tool that will help everyone essentially measure risk and benefit depending on the various steps that you take as you move from making the decision to implement AI to develop it yourself, use technology that already exists. What does that mean? What does that mean for your particular organization? And it's obviously based on use case as well. So how are you planning to roll out your deployment? And ultimately, is this just a pilot? Is this scalable? Yeah. Oftentimes the pilots are not scalable. So again, a very different calculation of risk.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by AI governance. What is that? I think that's a big word that's getting thrown around a lot. What is it? How do you define that? What does that look like in the organizations you work with?
So to me, it's about accountability, right? It's about accountability to the owners. It's also accountability to the employees and to, the other businesses that get served, the consumers, accountability to society. So AI governance is there within the organization to say that regardless of whether we've got regulations in the United States or not, regardless of what the rest of the world, like the Artificial Intelligence Act coming out of the EU, might have in terms of an impact overall on AI, we as an organization decide that we want to have better structure. We want to have oversight over the technologies that we deploy, especially emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. And as a result, we are bringing people together from within the organization where there is talent there, but also in many cases from outside of the organization so that you can get perhaps less biased views on what you're trying to achieve. And so that inside and outside governance means that it's separate and distinct from, your business units. And at the same time, it's taking all of that into account as well as the short-term and long-term goals of the organization. So it's really interesting to see how different companies are implementing this, in some cases for-profit, nonprofit, government. It all looks a little different. So I really think that it depends on the organizational structure and also on whether they actually have legacy systems to deal with or if they're starting from scratch. A startup is much easier to create an AI governance structure from the get-go than trying to implement it on a company that's trying to do a transformation. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what does AI governance look like on your campus?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have an AI policy across the board, and what we have defined and what we continue to hold is that in the classroom, the role of the faculty is sacred and sacrament. So what we have determined is we want our faculty to maintain their controls, understand what am I trying to teach, what am I trying to get across for in the background, and let that inform how they want to implement it across the board. But understanding that, the posture we've taken is what we're calling a responsibly enthusiastic posture, meaning that where it makes sense, we want you to try and do some things. So if you're a faculty member and you want to explore what it could look like, we want you to have that permission. We want to understand that you have the backing from us as the administration to experiment on what it could look like in there. Because what we know is that if it's top down, right, it's not going to get put out right. And honestly, we're not going to have the best ideas, right, compared to a faculty. So as long as faculty understand that, at number one, it's their classroom, their rules, right? If you're an English professor and you're teaching students to write and you're trying to improve their writing, we've got your back when you tell them and hold the line, you should not be using AI because we're teaching you a specific skill. But if you're a business professor and you want to explore what does it mean to have AI start doing business analysis and you want your students to start learning and experimenting that, we've got your back there too. And we support that kind of responsibly enthusiastic approach to integrating these systems across the board, because at the end of the day, the students are using them and it's going to be the future. So rather than try and throttle it, how can we responsibly empower it? That's the question we have.
Nice.
Very nice. Are there any companies or industries that you think are leading the way in incredible governance and transparency and all of that?
Honestly, not as many as I'd like. The truth is that to answer your question, I've been asking myself the same question on an ongoing basis for years and years and years. And every year I think, this is the year that I'm going to come up with some really great case studies to be able to showcase. And sadly, I always feel like I'm falling flat. So in 2023, it was the first time that we ever saw the Stanford Transparency Index when it comes to AI. And, the top companies that we all know did not fare very well at all. In May, we saw that Transparency Index come out again, which are ranking the same companies. And then they've got some additional ones, more traditional ones like IBM, et cetera. Sure. So if I'm looking at that, in terms of transparency, we've got Meta, who in 2023 had a transparency rating on 100 of 54%, now went up to 60%, which, it's an increase, but not that much of an increase. Sure. We've got Stability AI that went from 47% transparency to 58% transparency, and then OpenAI that went from 48% transparency to 49%.
Wow.
Amazon, big jump there. 12% transparency in 2023 to 41% in 2024. Now, Amazon is one of these companies that I highlight in my book.
Right.
I personally would not want to work for Amazon. It must be incredibly challenging to have your time off task being calculated on an ongoing basis by an AI. In fact, many of the employees in manufacturing, essentially, who's your boss? Well, the AI is my boss because it's measuring everything I do, including when I go to the bathroom. Who wants to live like that? But
Sure.
in many cases, you don't have a choice.
Right, right. Now, I want to ask this: adopting, I think adopting artificial intelligence often sparks fear of losing control, both organizationally and society, from a societal standpoint.
Sure.
So why do you think there is this fear out here, and that of losing control, and is it justified? Or, how do we ease that?
Oh, that's the question of the ages. So the reality is, as I learned while I was doing the research for this book, is that control, the need for control, is a biological need. It is a drive that every single human on the planet has. We all want more control of our life. Think about it, right?
Sure.
No matter what the context that you're in, whether you're at work, you're at home, you're with your family, you're dealing with societal issues, we all want more control. So that's not going away. But then the fact that we are so reliant on our digital technologies, from the technology that we're using to have this conversation to our devices that follow us everywhere, our entire modern infrastructure is built on artificial intelligence. And I think most of us are just kind of coming to that realization now, at least in G8 countries. And so we think that, this lack of friction that we have that's facilitated by, the big buy button when we go on Amazon, or, the recommendations that we get for everything in our lives, from movies to mates to jobs to where we're going to live, all of these things remove a lot of the friction, a lot of the weighing, the risk and benefit that we were talking about before. And as a result, we think that it's easier for us, so that we're more in control. We can do more things.
Right.
We don't have to think about how to get to work. We just follow our navigator, right? We're on autopilot for most of the time, but that does not mean that we're in control. In fact, according to Columbia business professor Sheena Iyengar, that's a sign that, in fact, we have addiction. And we know from studying addiction that when you are addicted to something, that's exactly when you are the least in control. So how many of us are addicted to our phones?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm thinking as you're describing this world, and especially when you talked about Amazon, but then this addiction to control, it's interesting to me because it seems like the functions that AI is replacing, right, are those control functions across the board, which is a very interesting paradigm, right? We thought that AI would replace us from the bottom up. But it seems like AI is starting from the top down, right? Like, what is it? We're actually closer to an AI replacing a CEO than we are it replacing, your entry level kind of person on there. Are people seeing that? Is that a trend you're seeing across the board? Are people thinking that way?
Well, as you know, we live in an incredibly polarized country, incredibly polarized world. So I think different people are seeing different things. What I'm seeing is what you're describing. Yes, absolutely. In fact, you might have followed the story of the politician in Wyoming this summer that ran on a platform for councilmen. And he wasn't just running himself. He was saying that if I win, then my AI that I have coded on the back of OpenAI with all of the legislature, all of the different laws and regulations that came through this particular county. And so if I'm elected, this AI will make all of these decisions for our county. He didn't win. But that's just the first of many that we will see many instances. In fact, would the university be better run by an AI? I think it really depends on who you ask, right? And it's all about context. So, I also think about the workers that I was mentioning before, the ones that are being measured for their time off task, even just stopping and asking a
Right.
question to another coworker, if it's not encoded within the algorithm of these are the steps that one takes to do one's job, that's considered time off task. So a lot of these people, in the future will likely be replaced by robots, by automated factories, and so on and so forth. I think it's happening on both ends. And the only jobs that are truly safe in the medium to long term, I think, are psychologists to help us deal with all of this stuff.
Yeah, analyze it. Are there any risks that we're not paying attention to that we better start focusing on?
I think there are many risks that, the network knows what no one person knows. And I think that the fact that we're having more and more of these conversations in open social contexts as opposed to privileged ones or professional ones or, behind boardroom doors, where we now have the technology in the hands of the majority of people, at least in G8 countries. Now that means that more people can actually participate in the larger conversation and help us decide what do we want to do with these technologies. So I think the risk is that we once again defer because it causes more friction to actually stop and think. Right. So the empowerment that you demonstrate with your professors on campus, right, where if it makes sense to them and what they're trying to teach within the context of that particular student or that particular class that's in front of them, that's the kind of thinking that does require risk-benefit analysis. And I think that more and more of us, again, are delegating these functions, and the risk is that we completely forget how to measure risk and benefit on the most important things in our lives. And so to me, it's more a question of digital literacy, data literacy, AI literacy, but it's also a question of, I think, priority. What do we as a society prioritize? This is a question that keeps coming up with my students at NYU. Why am I paying all of this money to get this degree to, say that I'm now a grad student, or I have this extra, something on my resume that I can add, when ultimately many of the skills that I'm learning are done better by AI. What is the point of all of this? And I remember when I first went to school a long time ago, right? I was told, why would you want to learn how to code? Like, we're going to have systems that do all of this stuff, and they already existed. But what I learned was that coding allowed me to think in a very different way. I think it helped me develop my rational brain more, so that now I rely both on rational and also on intuition. And I can balance both, which allows me to speak and be able to communicate and connect with more types of people. And ultimately, I think that's our saving grace. If we can develop those basic human skills, then we do have cause to celebrate, because that means that the technologies that we're developing will serve all of us and not just some of us, especially those of us who have more money and more power and more access to technology.
Sure. Staying ahead in kind of this rapidly evolving field of AI requires us to be flexible, to be adaptable. How do you become disciplined to personally stay ahead of the curve in a field that evolves faster than almost anything on the planet?
Curiosity. I have an endless amount of curiosity. And you're right. I mean, every day there are hundreds of new companies that are developing new products that are really fascinating. There are, hundreds and hundreds of white papers that are kind of in my inbox waiting for me to read them. And that's what I plan to do, during the holidays, when most people go away and they shut down their computer. Like, that's when I dive in. That's when I feel that I have time. But I don't do it because it's my work. I do it because I care, because I'm passionate about it, because it brings me joy. And I think finding those things in our lives are incredibly important. And if you can find even more joy exploring the things that you do by optimizing, by using these technologies, then these things go hand in hand, right? A lot of people are nervous, for example, about their kids and, what are my kids going to do with AI and what's their life going to be in the future? And so these are conversations to have with your kids. These are tools to use with your kids. This is where you both get to learn together. These, to me, I don't have a traditional family, and just about everybody's dead in my family, but ultimately that human connection is about finding commonality. And I think that these tools allow us to do that because many of them were launched just a couple of years ago. So we're all kind of at the same starting point.
And this is something you talk about in your book, The AI Dilemma. I mean, this is kind of the crux is, okay, here's the 7 principles we can all kind of start gathering around, which is what people are looking for, right? It's like we're all on different planes, we're all on different levels. Some of us, like you and me, we've gone down the line with white paper. Some of us feel so far behind, and that's why I think this book is so powerful. Walk us through a little bit about some of the principles you outline in that book in order for you to kind of get up to speed quickly with AI.
Sure. So the first principle is really about calculating risk. And we've already talked about that. I think that all of us need to do that as a group and incorporate some of the elements of the final principle, which is creative friction. Again, we are living in a mostly frictionless world at this point where we use digital technology. We just press on a button, everything arrives, everything is paid for. We don't have to think very much about it. As we think as business people, it's very important for us to think also as humans. And the more humans that we get to kind of weigh into what it is that we're trying to develop with this particular AI in this particular use case in this particular organization, it actually favors us to ask more questions before you actually develop the thing, while you're developing the thing, after you've deployed the thing, right? You want to incorporate all of that feedback. And so getting diverse perspectives is really what creative fiction is all about. Yes, you want the experts, but you also want the everyday people that will literally be affected directly by the technology itself. Those people are actually much better positioned to figure out how could this technology go wrong in this particular use case and this, if the future goes this way, so that, again, you can start thinking about that from the outset as opposed to trying to undo things and go back. It's almost impossible to do. So thinking about these things from the outset and getting those diverse thinkers together makes all the difference in the world. And this is not just about AI. We see this at Pixar. We see this in, so many amazing organizations around the world. So I do think that it's useful for all of us to start thinking about how do we incorporate more diverse perspectives from the outset. There's a really great study, something that came out of Columbia University. I studied all of this stuff while I was there, went back to school, graduated in 21, turned my dissertation into a book. And David Stark was one of my professors. He's an organizational sociologist, and he did a lot of work specifically on diversity. And his whole thesis is that diversity, and I'm not just talking about race, I mean all forms of diversity, especially diversity of thought, right? And even if you have the same, cultural background as somebody, as soon as you went to a different school, different socioeconomics, we've got, different neurodivergence, et cetera. The more you have diverse teams, the longer it takes to deliberate because more people are going to ask more questions and more people have to weigh in. But ultimately, the teams that do the best, that make the most money, that are the most productive, both on Wall Street as well as in Japan, in a cross-section of different industries, are the teams that are the most diverse because they create services and products for more people. They open up markets.
That's great. Well, powerful book, and encourage all of our listeners to grab the book, The AI Dilemma: 7 Principles for Responsible Technology. Get up to speed on how we tackle this incredible opportunity for all of us in our organizations. Juliette, a privilege to have you on Framework Leadership. We're grateful for this conversation and for the wonderful insight that you have provided us even today on this.
Well, I'm so grateful that you invited me. I hope to get a chance to come back again.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. And if you want to stay up to date with Juliette, you can follow her on Twitter and LinkedIn at Juliette Powell. You can also check out her website at juliettepowell.com. Books available wherever you get your books across the board. You can check it out at her website, Amazon, wherever you get books. Make sure you pick that up, The AI Dilemma: 7 Principles for Responsible Technology. Thank you so much for listening to Framework Leadership today.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Framework Leadership. If you're watching on YouTube, now would be a great time to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you can get incredible leadership content right to your YouTube feed. You can also check us out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts every single week, Framework Leadership. And if you love great email newsletters, and I know I do, make sure you check out keningle.com and subscribe to the Framework Leadership newsletter. It's an incredible piece of content we put out every single week of amazing leadership resources right to your inbox. Make sure you check it out. You can also follow us on Instagram at Kent_Ingle, at Dr. Michael Steiner, on X at Kent Ingle, and on Facebook at Kent.Ingle. Stay up to date on all the incredible things happening on the podcast and at Southeastern University. We love you guys and we love our followers and our subscribers. Thank you so much for listening to the Framework Leadership Podcast.